On this week's Bet the Process podcast, we have probably one of the biggest names we've ever had on this podcast. We have Mina Kimes. The biggest. We have Mina Kimes, which is super exciting. She joins us to talk through her background, her history, what got her into being an NFL analyst. And we talk through all 4 games and even give a couple picks. We're actually blazing hot on this podcast, 2-0 in our last 2 picks. So with that, let's start the process. Welcome to another episode of the Bet the Process podcast, where I, like the rest of the internet, are annoyed at Rufus. Just kidding, Rufus. You always make us race around for the podcast. It's funny because we have such different schedules. I think it makes it hard for us to actually be on the same page when it comes to the podcast. But how are you doing?
Well, we're in different time zones. I think that's part of it. And you have kids and you're preparing for a big weekend. I'm doing well.
Turned 50.
I'm doing well. It's been a challenging week for me, not for the reasons that you would think. It has nothing to do with Twitter, but it's just we've had a Jeff knows we've had a tough stretch on the betting front. And so, it's one of those weeks, but it's occasionally you go through one of these but one of these streaks that kind of makes you question things a little bit, but stick with the process. You look at the fundamentals.
Yeah. So, how do you, because this is actually like interesting, right? This is uncharted territory for you. It's a new sport that you're betting, college basketball. It's a sport that you personally don't have a lot of domain expertise in. And you guys are betting a pretty high volume of games from what I can tell. And, it's, as someone that's like kind of kept an eye on your betting, it's like, you're losing, like some of these games are not even in it. And like, what makes you, how do you deal with something like this and feel compelled, like, maybe, like, what gives you the conviction to keep betting, I guess?
It's a good question. The back testing of the model, the actual betting that my partner did last year with a model that had a similar framework, but didn't have some of the same things incorporated into the projections that we do now. And the fact that we've been getting good closing line value, but part of that, you have to worry that you're creating your own closing line value if you're betting enough. Mm-hmm. So that's something we're keeping an eye on as well. But we're also looking and testing.
How do you keep an eye on that? How do you keep an eye on that?
We're looking and seeing where the line goes after we bet it. And so if we bet and we don't move the line at all afterwards, if we can do it completely off screen or something without that information getting out, then I don't think we're creating our own closing line value. But if there's certain people we're using to get down, and I know that they know, once they get down for us, part of it is they want that information to be able to utilize it themselves. And so in those cases, you kind of expect that there will be some movement in that direction if they believe in what we're doing. And so that's, but truly you don't know. And so I don't know. I think you have to think about what are the chances that you go through one of these streaks, and these streaks happen. It's happened. They've happened to me in golf. They've happened to me in baseball. They've happened to me in football. They've happened to me in second half betting back when things were really, really good in second half betting. So they do happen. I think what makes it harder is just the fact that we have not been betting college basketball for very long. And so you have to ask, is it just part of these natural fluctuations, or is there something wrong in the code or in the productionizing of it, or something we're missing? Because the model is built, the model is the same model for 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. It's the same code running that's producing these things. And so we wouldn't expect things to be drastically different. There are some rule changes and stuff that we incorporate, but I don't know what to say. I've heard from other people the market's a lot more efficient this year, and I have looked, and we've shown fewer edges than we have in previous years, and sort of smaller edges. But I mean, I'm confident. I'm confident. We're still going to keep firing into it. So that's all I got to say.
One thing that I've noticed as someone that hasn't really bet college basketball for a while, a few years, it does seem that teams' behavior at the end of games is even more crazy than it used to be. Like, it used to be crazy, but I feel like it's gotten even crazier. And I mean, fouling down 10 with 15 seconds left or 10 seconds left. And like, that's one thing I would think would be hard to simulate or model. And I think teams, from an analytical standpoint, why wouldn't you foul there, right? It's like, why wouldn't you still, as long as you still have like a greater than 1% chance to win, why wouldn't you still foul, right?
You don't have a greater than 1% chance.
Well,
down
not
10 with
in the
15
exact
seconds.
situation
But-
that I talked about, but down 9 with 40 seconds left, certainly you have greater than 1% chance.
All the college basketball teams foul there. I don't think the NBA teams do though, because they're good enough free throw shooters.
No, the NBA teams definitely don't in that situation.
But the
NBA
other thing
teams
is
sometimes don't
conserving
foul.
effort. You have to, I mean, the NBA teams are thinking about it like it's a long season, and why are we going to waste our energy making the last minute of the game last, 10 minutes? So I think some of the fouls at the end with like 10 seconds to go can be attributed to frustration, probably after you miss a shot and you're going for the rebound and you don't get it. And,
right.
I mean, but it's funny. I mean, even the same teams will do it differently from night to night.
Yeah, there is no rhyme or reason to this. It's very much, and it's crazy. Like, a lot of your bets I've watched have come down to like that desperation 3 at the end, whether it goes or not, both ways, both directions, right? And it's like, it's betting college basketball totals. And it was funny because when you started talking to me about it, I was like, oh man, he's in for it. This is a whole world of like different kind of ridiculous sweat than you ever thought possible, right?
Well, I haven't watched any of the games really. I'll just follow on ESPN. But our
That's
sides
sometimes just as
surprisingly,
bad or even worse.
oh, it's worse, I think. Our sides surprisingly have been doing much better.
Why is that surprising?
Because our sides haven't done as well historically. Our edges
Small
are smaller.
size,
we
right?
have fewer. It is a small sample size. That's the thing. I don't expect to continue running at 10% ROI on the sides.
Well, we're going to welcome in Mina Kimes now. This is a real unique situation for us where we have like a legitimate NFL personality that people have heard of on this podcast. So we'll talk to you guys again on the other side. We now welcome in Mina Kimes, who's probably the most legitimate person we've ever had on this podcast, which is pretty exciting. Mina, you almost weren't able to join us here because you were at the super spreader dinner that I put on that Rufus managed to try to give everyone COVID. I don't know if you know that.
He's patient zero?
I am patient zero.
Legitimately half
I didn't
of
know
that
it.
dinner ended up having COVID and then COVID symptoms in the next week. And that was one of those, like, this was at the Sloan Analytics Conference and it was in 2020. And all of us were like, we probably shouldn't be having this conference, but we all just still did it and went into small areas to have dinner. But that was, thank you for coming to that dinner, and thank God we didn't give you COVID. Although maybe you were asymptomatic.
I was one of the survivors. Did not get it, to be clear, at that dinner. I remember that conference very vividly though, because I did a football analytics panel there, and I got my friend Alec Hallaby, who's a assistant GM of the Eagles, to come. And in the days leading up, he was like, I've been on like Reddit and there's this COVID in China. There's like some pretty alarming. And I was like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And then when he came, he was so nervous and he was absolutely right about everything. So shout out to Alec.
Yeah, it was that at that, I stayed at the Ritz and was in an elevator with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert at one point.
Ooh.
And Rudy Gobert was the guy that obviously got it 4 or 5 days later. So I think Boston was the epicenter of a lot of this, hopefully. Or not hopefully, but
Jeff, do you remember when we were in the lobby of the Ritz with the Utah Jazz team there?
Yeah.
And I was there. And so I feel I've personally taken credit for giving it to Rudy Gobert.
Took down the NBA.
I did. It's my greatest accomplishment.
All
Yeah,
right.
that
Enough
that
COVID
was
nonsense.
yeah, right. Feels like a really long time ago.
It does.
Yeah. So, we welcome you in. And what's your official title at ESPN these days?
It is NFL analyst.
Got it. And how did you become an NFL analyst? What was the sort of like steps to get there and to where you are right now?
Yeah, so I was a financial journalist after college for some time, first at Fortune magazine and then at Bloomberg News. I wrote investigative stories for most of my career. And then ESPN hired me in 2014 as a staff writer for ESPN the magazine. So I wrote a column about kind of the business of sports, but kind of culture and social stuff with sports. And then I wrote a bunch of features, profiles of athletes, traveled a bunch for stories. And I would say maybe a few years after I joined ESPN, I started doing football podcasts with my friend Bill Barnwell. And from there, did a couple of radio shows. I did a fantasy football radio show. Then I had my own radio show. And then from there, I became a panelist on Around the Horn, Highly Questionable, shows like that, where I was more of a generalist, but I just really, really wanted to talk about football. I started my own football podcast, Mina Kimes Show, featuring Lenny around that time. And eventually, someone at ESPN, when they were rebooting NFL Live, which is one of the shows I'm on, said, would you be interested in like changing your job altogether and really focusing on football? And it was like something I was really excited about doing. So I think in 2020 is when my job title changed. It was, because we launched our show at the very beginning of the pandemic. So it was right then. And that's been my job title ever since. And it is actually a pretty meaningful change because the work that I do, I don't really write as much anymore. I'm a generalist on Around the Horn, but I spend most of my time thinking, studying, covering football.
Do you do a lot of like film study or analytics? Like, how do you become what do you use to get sort of an edge? Like, obviously you're not getting an edge the way Rufus and I are in betting necessarily, but you want an edge because you want to have a unique take, right, on football that makes your appearance interesting or differentiated, right?
Besides drawing on my copious playing experience, you mean?
Exactly.
No, yeah, a lot of it really, I do spend a lot of time working with data, and I would say that's kind of the difference I bring to a lot of our shows. I'm very fortunate also in this capacity that I have access to databases that I didn't before, whether it's Next Gen Stats. True Media is the platform that I probably use the most to do stats work. And a lot of it is just looking at matchups, trying to figure out weaknesses that teams can exploit, looking at tendencies, seeing how those tendencies change over the course of the season, and then marrying those with film study. A lot of my time, it kind of goes back and forth. Like I'll notice something on tape and then go to the stats, but then sometimes I'll notice something in the stats and then go from there to the tape. So it's really just trying to get tape and film to work together, which is something we really try to do on NFL Live too.
How did you learn, as Rufus and I being two failed ESPN personalities, how did you learn to be good on TV? What was the key to that for you, or was it natural for you?
I think I'm still learning how to be on TV. So it's still very much a work in progress. But, for me, a lot of it was becoming comfortable delivering opinions, especially being a reporter. That's not really how I came up, being an opinionator, where, my value add was just kind of getting information. I think what I learned is that, or what I kind of eventually figured out, is doing tape study, gathering stats was just a different kind of reporting. And then communicating that was not too dissimilar from writing stories. But instead of, writing a 3,000 word story based on my reporting, I'm giving like a 1 minute soundbite. So it was kind of like, how do I find cool information that's new and original or takes, and then synthesize that. And so for me, like being on Around the Horn was really invaluable because I learned how to like be concise and, kind of not spend too much time in the weeds and figure out which stats worked on TV, which opinions worked. And then a big part of it was just kind of comfort being myself. I used to be really, really nervous every time I was on TV and really, really apprehensive of being wrong. And you just gotta let all that shit go. And that's something that just comes with doing it every day. And at a certain point, you're like, oh, I didn't hit it out of the park today, but there's always tomorrow. And once you kind of develop that mind state, it's, I guess, not too dissimilar from certain things in sports. You just kind of get used to taking swings at it and you get more comfortable taking bigger swings.
What's been the most satisfying thing for you about the job? If it's one moment or just something more general?
I think there's two things that come to mind. One thing I really love about TV and podcasting is the collaborative aspect of it. Like, I am not someone who wants to be like a solo artist and do my own thing and do my own show or whatever. I love being part of teams. And I've been really lucky to land on some pretty good ones at ESPN. Our NFL Live team, it's like a joy to work with them. Like, most of the time we have like an ongoing group text that's just every hour we're just texting each other, and I think it translates into the show. So the best moments for me, the most rewarding ones, are like when we're on TV and someone says something and then it triggers a conversation and we all ask each other questions and everybody gets excited. I like that more than like debating, you know what I mean? Like, I just like that feeling of, oh, like they can see what it's like to be at a bar with us and like we're actually talking about something. And then I guess the other thing is like, coming up, there weren't women who give opinions about sports. There were more analysts, really. There weren't that many, and not covering the NFL. And at ESPN, there haven't been female NFL analysts or Asian American ones. And I hear a lot from younger people who are trying to get into this business, who are women and Asian American, who kind of hit me up and they're like, oh, I now think I can do this. So that's pretty cool and rewarding.
What's your strategy for dealing with all the Twitter trolls and the people that, I mean, because I'm sure you get a ton of abuse.
Rufus is literally now just asking for advice because
I
honestly am.
Dude, this is the number one thing that like whenever I talk to people, they ask about, because I think it's something that literally every human on earth is like, whether you have 1,000 followers or 1 million, it is something that I don't think nobody's brains are equipped to deal with. And I think we're all trying to figure it out in real time. And it's pretty disastrous, frankly, and it shouldn't be a thing. Like, people shouldn't have access to that. For me, like, I struggle with my own, I know the right way to do it, which is really to not look, frankly, because of how my mind works. And sometimes I do a pretty good job of that. I have a lot of pretty elaborate filters set up that I would recommend, which sucks because I miss out on a lot of cool stuff and nice stuff too. But I just know that, like, if I get 100 nice comments and one mean one, that's the only one I'll remember. But every now and then I am incredibly impulsive and write something mean back. So I don't want to act like I figured it out entirely, because especially if there's like a joke to be had, I sometimes can't resist it.
What impact has the sort of growth of gambling had on your sort of analysis? Like, has it changed things at all? Do you feel like you need to be more abreast of point spreads and totals, and has it impacted the way you prepare or the work that you do, your process?
I mean, definitely spreads like influence how we talk about games now at just a very basic level, right? But that's different from even 4 or 5 years ago. I think it's useful because something I think about is like, so I'm on a lot of shows where sort of like First Take or even SportsCenter will just say like, is this person overrated? Is Dak overrated? Are the Cowboys overrated? Right? We can actually quantify that now. So it's not as vague a question. And usually, honestly, Vegas properly rates things. So I can be like, no, look at this. Like, this is a neutral apprehension. Like, I guess what I'm saying is like, public perception is now something that we can actually back with hard information, which I personally appreciate because I think it makes the discourse a little bit more intelligent. So for me, I think that's kind of the starting point of how it affects the way we talk about sports. Is we're aware of the view of teams, players, matchups, and then we can work off of that awareness, and it's not even for me about like giving advice or saying, they're going to cover. So, I get asked about that stuff. It's more just saying like, okay, here's where the public stands on this, right? Like, here's what smart people think. Let's talk about what that's going to happen and why or why not.
Interesting. Rufus, anything else, or do you want to jump into this week's games?
No, I was getting one quick thing. Do you use, I guess, how games go relative to the point spread to evaluate any of your own opinions and your film analysis married with the stats that you do?
Well, I would first start saying I use spreads themselves to evaluate my opinions. Like, if I'm like way off on something or I have like a very different view, it probably makes me question it a little bit more and examine it and ask whether I'm missing something. So that I would say is kind of the starting, another way in which it affects, not just from the perspective of like, how do we quantify public opinion and whether like what is rated, but like also, okay, I think this, like, why am I so far off on this? You know, what does that mean? And I usually don't use it to like necessarily second guess myself more than just kind of examine some of my priors. And then like, yeah, it's like kind of the way things go. I think if there's a lot of deviations from expectations, it's not too similar from a deviation from advanced statistics. The very basic example being like Vegas hated the Minnesota Vikings this year. Advanced metrics didn't like the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings won a lot of games, but every week I would go on TV and say they're not a great football team. And I think that's a way in which, we can kind of look at whether the results are like predictive or not, I suppose.
And you get a lot of Minnesota fans telling you that you're wrong.
They were pretty mad this year. Yeah. Until this week, obviously.
They're just mad because it's cold where they are. Like they need more warmth in their lives.
It is
I thought
really
the
cold.
Midwestern people were more friendly. Because
not if they're just stuck in Minnesota. What about this week's games? Are there ones that popped out to you guys as ones that surprised you? Is there one that you said, oh, now I need to reevaluate my priors on this?
Rufus, you want to go first?
Not really. I mean, I think what surprised me a little bit is that if anything, I show value on the two big favorites this week, which I didn't really expect.
So we'll start with Jacksonville KC. That's an 8.5 point line. The total's 53. The narrative I heard at the start of the playoffs is that KC's D is better this year than in past years, and KC could be good value to get through, to the Super Bowl and even win the Super Bowl. Mina, does your sort of film study or analysis show any sign that KC is better this year from a defensive perspective, or how do you feel about them generally?
Yeah, the defense did improve a lot as the season went along, and that's if you look at stats that adjust for opponent like DVOA as well as EPA per play and those other things, and they improved a lot. Especially, I thought the pass rush looked a lot better as the year went on. So I went back and watched when these teams met in week 10. And I thought the Chiefs defense was very good in that game in certain ways. I thought the pass rush was also very good in this. Chris Jones took over the game essentially on his side. But I also, something that jumped out to me that made me a little bit more cautious about this big spread is the Jaguars offense really hadn't quite figured things out at that point. I mean, it was kind of the beginning. Trevor Lawrence was much better in the second half of the season by every stat. And he wasn't bad in this game, but there are just, and this is not about the stats, but they've gotten a lot better at beating man coverage, which the Chiefs play a lot. They figured out how to use Evan Ingram after the catch. The Chiefs are not great at tackling and have just kind of gotten better also at mitigating pressure. And Lawrence has been just much more confident and accurate throwing the football. So that kind of gave me a little bit of pause about, this game. The Chiefs were pretty dominant in this one. Aside there, a couple things didn't go their way, but I think that the Jags offense has improved so much, and that gives me a little bit of pause in buying into the Chiefs defense on this.
Yeah, our numbers actually like the over in this game, which is 53. So
I like both offenses.
Yeah, it's a very high total, but yet we like it up to 53.5. Rufus, do you have any other thoughts on this game?
No,
your numbers actually like KC.
Well, I make the spread 10.1. And so, Kansas City's getting credit for that buy, which helps. But I'm a little surprised, though, just because I have been higher than the market on Jacksonville. And I like Jacksonville a lot this past week. So, maybe I just really disliked the Chargers.
Pure chaos. Yeah, I think, the other thing I like about Jacksonville, about the offense is, and I think Kansas City's going to win, to be clear. I just don't think this Jags defense can stop Patrick Mahomes the way he's playing. But I joked about this. Doug Peterson opened the game with an onside kick, which is just hilarious. And then on the same drive, he didn't go for on fourth down, which kind of undermines what I'm about to say, which is certainly something you saw on display this weekend. He is a coach who is not going to be conservative. He's going to seek every edge. He's going to go for it when he's supposed to go for it. He's going to going for two when they were down 4. He's going to do things like that make me more confident in Jacksonville's ability to put up points on Kansas City. He's not going to coach scared, and that does matter.
Well, one thing that historically we've talked a little bit about this type of coaching, and what this type of coaching does is that it actually makes Jacksonville probably more live on the money line, meaning they have a much better chance to win than what the point spread would say. And it actually makes them, in some respects, more likely to not cover, because he will, continue going forward on fourth down in situations when, other teams would probably be more conservative and try to punt and like keep the game close. And so if he does do that, it's interesting because that would, I think that would give a lot of value to the over potentially, and would tell you to bet Jacksonville on the money line and maybe Kansas City on the point spread. Rufus, do you have
But also, I was going to say, if you follow that line of reasoning, it would make the teaser less valuable, because that's normally a great teaser, going 8.5 to 2.5. And also the going for 2 and for example, like he did down 4, I mean, that makes the 3 worth less also. So, I mean,
interesting.
I think along those lines, the more uncertainty, higher variance.
Well, let's move on to the second game, which is the big points spread also. It's Philly minus 7.5, 48 against the Giants. Giants sort of coming off that obvious big win, a win that I think most analytical people sort of expected to some degree.
No.
Is the Giants, what's that?
I mean, it's not surprising, but I think it was 2 evenly matched teams.
Okay.
I mean,
but it wasn't a
huge surprise.
So what do we think about this Giants team going into Philly? Do we think they have a chance here, or is this
to win outright or to cover?
What's that?
Both.
To win outright or cover? Because I don't think
I think it's both. I mean, 7.5 is not an enormous line by any means. And I think if you bet the 7.5 on the Giants, you are believing that they have a chance to win. Like a 13-point spread, maybe you bet because you don't think the team has a chance to win. So I do think the Giants are getting quite a bit of momentum from the general sort of mainstream fan right now. And I think Philly is a little bit forgotten because of how great a start they got out to and how kind of like slow they were at the finish.
The injuries.
So
I think
Hurts full strength.
Yeah. They're saying he is. So,
And it's the third time these teams are playing.
Yeah, although the second time was kind of fake, but so I did watch this last game today, the Week 14 game, which is not fake, although the Giants had some injuries on defense at the time and they've got players back. However, the Eagles also didn't have Dallas Goedert, and the Giants, I think, are the second worst team in the NFL defending tight ends, which you saw on display against Minnesota because TJ Hawkinson ate. So I'm pretty high on Philly in this one, and while I think the Giants have improved, and I particularly really like some of the stuff they've done on defense, I think people are kind of overrating them because they just played probably the worst possible defense to like. I don't think Minnesota could have put together a worse defensive game plan to play. And this is a Minnesota defense that was bad all year. They couldn't stop the run. They were playing soft zone, which is very bad against New York because they have receivers who are pretty good at getting open space and getting yards after the catch. But it was really, really bad. And the Eagles defense does have certain weaknesses that I think the Giants can exploit. One thing that comes to mind, they're 30th in EPA per play versus quarterbacks on the run. And Daniel Jones barely ran the last time they played. So I expect that to happen, but they're just much more talented defensively. This pass rush is going to take advantage of the right side of the Giants offensive line. The DBs are really, really good. And then on the other side of the ball, again, it was like a kind of an ideal matchup in a way because Dexter Lawrence is the best player in the Giants defense and the Minnesota offensive line and the interior is very bad. Philly has the best interior offensive line in the NFL. So I just think the Giants have dramatically outperformed my expectations, and I don't think they're a fraudulent team. I just think the Eagles are much better.
How are we defining fraudulent?
Rufus,
because I still think the Giants are a below average team.
They're fine.
Yeah.
I think they're very matchup oriented is how I would describe it. It really, like against a team like Minnesota, you can point to so many wheres, like I just kind of was throwing out where, and against the Eagles, the only matchup I think where I like them is Daniel Jones as a runner, frankly. The Eagles offense could just beat you so many different kinds of ways. The Giants played a lot of cover one, and when you play cover one against Jalen Hurts, he's just been killing teams, throwing to those receivers outside. I don't know if they'll change it up this week, but I just think the Eagles have so many different answers offensively. I don't think they can solve it.
Rufus, what'd you say you make this line?
Philadelphia minus 9.6.
Seems like Philly's the play there. Buffalo, Cincinnati, in what is going to be a very exciting game. I feel like Buffalo minus the 5, 48 is the total. Is this a question of like Cincy's offensive line really spelling the doom for the Bengals? Or, I mean, like, because what we saw last week against Baltimore certainly didn't give us a lot of confidence in Cincinnati.
Yeah, this completely effed up this game. Like, I thought it was going to be awesome. And like the first 2 times these teams played, I was like very excited. It was obviously off to a very kind of hot start before the DeMar Hamlin injury. So watching the Bengals against Baltimore, who the defense plays Joe Burrow really well generally, but once Jonah Williams went out, I mean, they're down 3 starters now, and they're just like Burrow doesn't have any time. He knows he doesn't have any time. The ball is coming out quick. The Bills are much better at tackling than a lot of teams. I think they'll probably be able to generate some offense because he's so good throwing the ball quick and he's so good pre-snap. But it's going to be hard out there. The thing that makes this game makes me very nervous about it is Josh Allen has just been so unbelievably chaotic lately that I think Lou Anarumo, the Bengals defensive coordinator, is one of the best defensive coordinators in football. I am very concerned about him giving the football away.
I thought
that would be bad.
I think it's interesting because like Cincinnati didn't look great, but Buffalo, if you just look at the score, I mean, it looks like they drastically underperformed, but it's like every break that could have gone the Dolphins' way did go their way.
Yeah. I guess if Josh Allen hadn't been turning the ball over as much as he has, I would be like, I could write it off. But like, it's crazy, guy. It's like, I don't know what's gotten into him lately, but he's passing up on checkdowns. He's forcing balls into double. I mean, it's like a mindset thing, which is what makes it so hard to get a good feel for lately. And I do think this Bengals defense is really good, by the way, not just well coordinated. I think they've got a lot of talented players. I think the Bills offensive line isn't that great either. So I guess I wouldn't be surprised if this one is a little bit lower scoring, is what I'm saying, than perhaps it certainly than it seemed when the last time these teams played. Matt,
can we say maybe the anomaly was Josh Allen when he was checking it down and not making those throws, because he'd always been that guy before, and then it's like suddenly he was making more intelligent decisions and not having those boneheaded plays. Like, I forget what year it was, the playoffs against the Titans, when it was just like he would do one really dumb thing.
He tried to throw like a go bell to a fullback.
Yeah.
I feel like in that game, it was insane. Yeah. That was like his first playoff run. And then last year he was the Terminator in the playoffs, and he was making the smart plays. I don't know what's going on. I think some of it has to do with the Bills. Like I mentioned, the offensive line is not great. I think outside of Stephon Diggs, the Bills skill players are really unreliable. And I think that's created some problems for them in terms of just like being multiple. But I think the Bills win. I don't know. Josh Allen's just giving me the heebie-jeebies lately.
All right. And we'll finish off with the Dallas-San Francisco game, where San Francisco is favored by 3.5. The total's 48. This one has all the quarterback questions, obviously. Like, what is your film work analysis say on Brock Purdy? Is he closer to Nick Mullins or Tom Brady at this stage of his career? Meaning not obviously Tom Brady.
And would you rather have him or Jimmy Garoppolo?
Yeah, that's
if he was healthy.
I would rather have him than Jimmy Garoppolo. I'll start there.
Whoa.
Is that a provocative? I mean,
I don't know.
It's a little provocative amongst, I think it's provocative amongst like Rufus, who models old white quarterbacks as sort of a very, as very good, and young quarterbacks is never good.
Wow.
Race doesn't matter. Like Jason Campbell, we thought when he was a washed up journeyman, like, he fit the model for guys that are going to overachieve.
Well, Jimmy Garoppolo is a classic good stats, not actually that great quarterback. So maybe you just have a preference for quarterbacks where the stats make them look better than they are. I mean,
I just like guys that win, maybe.
Oh God.
No, I know.
But maybe
sorry.
Dude, the Seattle game was like exhibit A for how little it matters, man, because Brock Purdy was horrible in the first half. And then he got a little bit better, and he made some plays out of structure, which is kind of why I prefer him to Garoppolo. But
would you prefer him to Geno Smith?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Well, we're
No.
also dealing with the Seahawks.
I know.
Dude,
but
if you put Geno Smith in this offense, he would put up
He'd be
video
amazing.
game numbers. Like this is okay. So I mentioned this on my podcast. Brock Purdy finished that. Do you guys use CPOE ever? So it's
completion percentage over expectation.
yeah. So for your listeners who aren't aware, it's basically next gen stats metric that looks at what should be a quarterback's completion percentage based on the difficulty of the throw, the presence of defenders, that kind of thing, how open guys are. And then do they exceed it? Brock Purdy put up like 11 yards per play in this game. It was like insane, 300 yard, everything. He finished with a negative CPOE. That is how good Kyle Shanahan is and how good these skill players are. And that's not even saying he was bad. My point is more that this is the most quarterback friendly offense I think I've ever seen. So ultimately it just doesn't really matter.
It's like Trent Dilfer with the Ravens. And well, actually that offense was bad, but they just had a really good defense.
Yeah.
But that level of quarterbacking is all you need to win the Super Bowl if you're the 49ers, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think with him, the fear is like he has come close to turning it over a few times. I would say the other thing that gives me a little bit of apprehension, I think the Niners are a better team than Dallas, is he has not played a pass rush like Dallas is, and certainly not an edge rusher like Micah Parsons. If you look at the Niners schedule, it's actually been pretty soft defensively since he took over as quarterback. The Seahawks defense is terrible, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we see him make mistakes we haven't seen him make this season.
Interesting. So Rufus, do you have what's your numbers say in this game?
San Francisco -1. I almost said San Fran, but I realized I can't say that because you're.
Oh, so you actually like Dallas
don't
in
say
this
that.
game. That's
I
probably
do,
going to be your bet going into this game. Interesting.
Yeah, my numbers like on the Niners have and on Purdy specifically have ticked up each week, but I'm still looking at it from a Bayesian perspective, and I don't have the film work part, and it's hard to sort of differentiate quarterback from system, offensive coordinator, skill position players just statistically.
Yes.
And so I think that's part of the issue for
what
sure.
What do you think you would make the line here if it was a Garoppolo?
Same.
No, I'd
no, but Rufus would make it.
I would probably
my guess
make
is Rufus
it.
would make it higher.
I'd
Niners
probably
by
make
20.
it -4, -3.5.
I do think the Dallas offense can move the ball in this time. I mean, it is a little bit of it just having seen Dak Prescott play the best game of his career, but there's a few areas in which the Niners defense is weak that I think Dallas can take advantage of. So yeah, we'll see.
Okay. All right. We have 7 questions that we ask all our guests, and they're a little bit, they tend to be a little cringy. So you can feel free to pass on any of these, but we at least feel like we need to ask them. The first question is, who is funnier, Rufus or Jeff?
I don't think either of you guys made any jokes today, so I can't say for sure.
Okay, so neither of us.
Neither.
Yeah, I guess
I like
neither
that
is my answer. Sorry.
Who's smarter, Rufus or Jeff?
I don't know. That Jimmy Garoppolo opinion really threw me. So maybe Jeff.
What's the least relatable food that you like?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love corn. I don't know.
Like
maybe
corn on the cob.
I just like all corn.
That sounds very unrelatable.
Corn on the cob, cornbread, like street corn with like. I just think corn is so good.
What about candy corns?
That's not. I mean, not candy corn.
It doesn't even look like corn.
Don't be a.
Have you ever had cheesy corn, like the Korean, like pub food? It's so good.
I've had no, I don't think I've ever had the Korean pub food. That sounds delicious though.
It's incredible.
It's interesting that cheese has become something that you eat in Korean restaurants. Like I had
I hate it.
beef dish the other day where there was cheese in it, and it was like I was like, when did Koreans start eating cheese like in their dishes? But what's your favorite gambling moment? Have you had one? It can be in a casino. Oh, could it be the time that you helped someone win $1 million on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Yeah, I guess that counts, right, as a gambling moment. Yeah, I'll say that because I've never. You know what? When DFS started, I feel like I had a really good week once, but I think that's I have a good fantasy moment, which it's not quite the same. My first year in ESPN, so ESPN has a war room league for all like Rex Ryan and Teddy Bruschi, and they let me in last year, and I won my first year as a rookie, which had never happened.
Wow. I bet our friend Matthew Berry wasn't too happy about that.
It was not. No. Shout out to Amon-Ra St. Brown for carrying me to the finish. Waiver wire picker.
Can you tell the Dave Chang story? Because I think that's a great story.
So my friend Dave Chang was the celebrity guest on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and he had me and my other friend Alan Yang as his phone of friends. And he called on both of us, and he called me for the $1 million question. And it was who was the first president in the White House to have electricity? I think it was. It feels so long ago.
Was it Thomas Edison? No,
it was Benjamin Harrison.
Did you know this off the top of your head, or were you just a really fast Googler?
I guessed. So neither is the answer. And
did you tell him you knew though? Or
no, confident? I was like, I think like it wasn't at all a confident thing. And then he's a crazy man, so he just rolled with it.
Nice.
I was just kind of going for time period. You know what I mean? Like just a couple of them were like, no, it's not that. Yeah. Anyways.
That's like such a hard time period because there was like, I don't know.
Late 1800s.
Yeah. There was Rutherford B. Hayes, and there was, I forget which guy was president twice.
Bush?
It wasn't Grover Cleveland. No.
What's the favorite bet you are making in the next year? It can be a bet. It can be not a money bet. It can be a bet on, I don't know, family or anything. Any bets you're thinking about making?
I think that the Detroit Lions will win the NFC North. Start there. I just saw the news that they retained their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson. Mm-hmm. They might be the favorite though, so maybe that's not a good bet at all. So that might not be that provocative of a view. But yeah, I really, really like that team. I like a lot of the underlying metrics, I think, support that they're going to be good next year.
Worst loss you've ever had in your life? We always talk about gambling losses, but I don't know if there's like it shouldn't be too serious, because now that story outside of the gambling world sounds very, very serious.
It sounds very, yeah.
Well, I'll go to the flip side, which is I finished last in the War Room League this year. I was literally the Rams of my league. Like I went from, and I had like Cooper Kupp, so it was because of the Rams that I finished last.
Did you stop caring and start thinking about your vacation instead?
I have 3 leagues. Yeah, right. I have 3 leagues, so I channeled all my energy into the one that was most competitive, which is my dynasty team.
And then the final question is, person you'd follow blindly.
Wow. Dan Campbell.
Yes, I love it.
I'll go with Bill Barnwell, man, who if you gamble on football, I would read everything he says. And he always does a really good job, by the way, of predicting which teams will regress. And he's usually nails with his predictions. And I usually follow a lot of the same stuff he does. So he is definitely the most trustworthy person I know.
Awesome. Well, Mina, thanks for joining us. We have 7 listeners, so hopefully they all enjoyed your appearance. And, we look forward to seeing you all over ESPN and seeing you continue to blaze trails for Asian Americans and females and everyone in general. So keep up the awesome work.
Thanks for having me, guys. All right. Awesome.
Thanks, Mina.
All right, guys. That was fun.
So that was Mina Kimes, who I don't know if she'll regret being on our podcast, but it was a good conversation.
Most people do regret it.
That should be one of our
our questions. Are you going to
regret being on this podcast?
It has to be the last question, though.
Which one should that replace?
No.
We didn't get a chance on the beginning to talk about tiltiest moment of the week. Did you have one? It sounds like it was just a big tilt for you because of all the.
No, I mean, it's one of these things that becomes it's like a gradual tilt. Things just build up, right? You're like, okay, I reset today. Here's where we are. Well, I'm using my hands, which doesn't work for audio very well, but then if we start losing, it's like, oh, not again, rather than when things start turning and we had a really, really good run to end the year in 2022. And those are the times when it just feels like everything you're doing, you're going to win no matter what. And when it's going the other way, it's, yeah, I I just don't even want to look.
Yeah. I mean, I just know those moments when you're losing, like, and every day you lose. And it's funny because as bettors, I think that we all try to say, like, we don't judge short sample sizes, but every day, because there's this sort of natural break where you're done and you like go to bed and you wake up and you make your bets again. It's this natural moment where you want, like, sometimes you just want to feel like you had a positive day, even if it's just like a small positive. I don't know if you ever feel that way, but I have those days where I'm just like, I just want a small positive day.
100%. I'm like, I just don't want to lose today. Just
yeah.
please.
And it's weird.
I just don't want to lose. And it's
such
even
a,
after
it's such
all
an
these
arbitrary
years,
endpoint, right?
it is.
But
There's
we all
still
fall for it, right?
We're still human. Jeff, I'm still human.
Yeah.
I might not watch all the games. but I'm still
Yeah.
human. Here's a question. Would you rather, I was talking to another professional bettor, was this, no, 2 nights ago. He came to Buddhist class with me and yeah. But
you're Buddhist?
I don't know. I mean, I self-identify as,
I'm just
I guess,
kidding.
yeah,
I'm
okay.
just kidding. You didn't see my tweet about this, did you? I was saying
No.
they were asking, someone that was giving you crap was actually asking if we were going to have someone come onto the podcast to talk about whether people actually start companies to make money or not. And I was like, yeah, we're going to have the Dalai Lama on, but he's like, unfortunately got kicked out of or limited at William Hill. So he's looking for new outlets right now.
I will say, Jeff, I mean, I think you would agree that people generally have, a lot of startups have a purpose that isn't money, and money's a secondary thing. That's kind of all I was trying to say.
Well, so again, like, this is neither here nor there. You don't need my advice on this, but I think the main issue that you have, and one of our good friends actually texted me the other day and was just like, what's going on with Rufus on Twitter? And I was like,
wait, who is this that texted you? You can tell me privately if you want.
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
And as I was like thinking about it, I was like, the thing is, like, people don't really understand that Rufus is genuine and he genuinely thinks unlike any other human being in the world and has very little ability to understand how someone might interpret something he says that he means how someone might interpret something he says differently than the way he means it. So I do think, and I believe you, that when you started Unabated, it wasn't to necessarily make money. You did it because you enjoy working with people. You wanted to work on a project with people that, you wanted that collaborative feel. You've always needed that, like, sense of belonging from a business perspective or from a work perspective. And I don't think, like, making a lot of money was at all at the core of what you did. I think that the thing that you fail to recognize is that once you do start a commercial business, regardless of whether that's your top priority, that's always going to be seen as a priority at some level by other people at the company, and even in some respects for yourself, because you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders and to the other people that work with you. So it is a little bit, I don't want to say disingenuous, but it's naive to sort of overlook the idea of monetary gain as a motivation for anything that you do from a business perspective. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I'll say, I mean, I bet for a living, which seems like it must be all about the money, but but for me, I think, this, Jeff, the money's the scoreboard, but it's secondary to the challenge and obviously it's nice to have. I'm not going to give it away yet, but it was not the reason I got into this. And I just happened to get lucky that I picked a career that ended up being lucrative. I'm very lucky.
Right. But again,
Except
I think you fail
recently
to understand, like, how that all ends up sounding to someone that doesn't really, like, believe or know you the way that and it may not matter. You may not care.
Can I say, like, I think the reason I keep interacting with people about this stuff is because I like people and I want to be understood. I like understanding other people, and I want them to understand me. But but here's the thing, Jeff, there are people that don't actually want to understand. So that's what I'm walking into. That's what I'm walking into.
So I know. I don't think that.
I think that
is.
I think that is.
I think that's a little bit being dismissive.
No,
I think that's being dismissive of the situation that you are putting yourself into, which is trying to get people to understand you via Twitter.
I'll say this. A lot of these people, look, these people that are criticizing Captain Jack, he sent me like pictures of DMs they had sent him in the past saying like where he helped them. And they said they're such a big fan. And I mean, I just think it's this sort of cult, people like piling on. It's the mob mentality. And so I think that's what it is. And that's,
well, so I don't know
I think before I was thinking more like you, where, Jeff, I think you know this, that I'm open to criticism. I think
I criticize you all the time. So
I'm pretty open, and I'm willing to have these discussions. And that's why these things keep happening, because I'm willing to have the discussions, but I want the other people to actually be open as well, rather than have their viewpoint already set. And so otherwise there's no reason. Once somebody gets defensive, a conversation is over. You're never changing somebody's mind at that point.
What do you mean? I could change my mind.
Well, once you get defensive. Okay.
I was just kidding. I was being defensive. No, but okay. So irregardless of any of this, and so we should probably stop. This is kind of like a very nuanced conversation. What I would say is that at the end of the day, like the Twitter sphere as the vehicle to make people understand who the real Rufus Peabody is probably not the best medium to do it, right? Yeah. And so I think is at the core. I think more so than people don't really want to. Maybe it's like the two things in conjunction, right? Like people don't go to Twitter to change their minds, and you going to Twitter to get people to change their minds is not a great, like they're sort of.
I went to Twitter.
Issues.
I went to Twitter to defend my friend, who people were like, if you know Captain Jack, he is less motivated by money and more motivated by principle than anybody I know. And I mean, I've seen it up close and personal over many years, and so what is interesting to me is why everybody else.
Why did you guys end up starting a company instead? Why didn't you guys just do like a nonprofit like you had originally talked about?
We try. I mean, we don't have the business acumen to do that. And at the time when the pandemic happened, it became clear we weren't going to be able to get funding easily at all. And we need funding from books. And we had talked to them in before the pandemic. But at that point, I mean, to enact change in a meaningful way, I think we both realized that it would need to be at the legislative level too. And you need money for that. And I mean, neither Jack nor I are the kind of people that could really start a business on our own. I mean, maybe Jack could, I don't know, but I need a Jeff Ma. And I talked to you about that. I remember.
Yeah.
At the time.
I mean, I would tell you guys if I were working with you to stop tweeting. That's what I would tell you to do. Okay, let's move on. What do we have my tiltiest moment. My tiltiest moment was, can you guess what it was?
Tailing my college basketball.
It was a very specific moment on Sunday night at probably roughly 7:30 p.m. Pacific time, when
Sunday night
Tyler Huntley mistook himself for someone that was 7 feet tall and reached over the goal line, because I had the over in that game, I had the Ravens in the game, and I had the Ravens in the second half. Ouch. And I had a great week leading up to that, despite your college basketball. I had the Ravens second half too, by the way. Yeah. And I was feeling great. I mean, like, he scores that touchdown there. There's a reasonable chance I win all three, but there's very little chance that I don't win 2 out of 3, right? Because and so obviously we know what happened, and somehow I managed to lose all 3. That was my tiltiest moment. You want to talk about a pick of the week? Because I know you got to get to dinner.
Sure, might as well. Yeah, having dinner with our friend Chris Farges tonight, so that'll be nice. My
We're
pick of the
drawing
week,
the
I
ire.
guess I have to give an NFL. I'm going to go Dallas plus 3.5. The end.
I would have guessed that you were going to do that. I'm going to go Bills -5. I think the Bills are, they're the macro factor. I mean, Mina did worry me a little bit because I do think she's right about this like carelessness with the ball with Josh Allen, but I think they win this game. And I think it's interesting because this is one of those, like, if you went back in time, to say the beginning of the year and you were able to get, the Bills at plus money or whatever it is to win the AFC at this point. Like, I mean, I know a lot's happened since then, but has a lot happened since then?
Okay. So you're on the Bills.
Bills -5.
Okay.
All right. Hope everyone enjoyed this one. We'll talk to you guys all again next week.